Hi everyone, this is How to Games, and today I am answering my very first question submitted by a person who is not me. The question is, what are my thoughts on crunch specifically just before release? For anyone who doesn't know, crunch is the term used when the game development process is causing overtime or a huge amount of stress, lots of overworking. Developers might be working through the weekend, they might be working overnight, and this is usually linked to a deadline, very often the game's release. My very short answer would be that I think crunch is bad. But there is definitely more complexity and nuance than that, so let's dig in. So being overworked is definitely not just a problem that is limited to the games industry. Any job situation where you are being asked to do more than you are being paid for, where the work you're expected to do goes beyond the bounds of your contract, or beyond reasonable expectation, isn't a good situation to be in. Crunch in the games industry has been a hot topic for quite a while, and there seems to be some discussion on whether or not crunch isn't actually as bad as it sounds, or whether devs should just put up with it because they are in a situation where they get to work on a game. I think that regardless of what you're working on and your personal feelings towards that project, if you are being expected or being forced to work overtime to really exhaust yourself to get to a point where you feel mentally or physically unwell, that is not a good situation. It's not an okay situation. I will say that in my personal experience, and this is just my personal experience, I have found that the mobile games industry seems to have less of a problem with crunch than other parts of the games industry do. That's not to say that crunch in mobile games doesn't exist. I'm sure it is a big problem for some teams and for some individuals, but personally, I haven't been as affected by it. I have met a lot of people who have left jobs because they have found them too stressful, because the expectations of the amount of work they're supposed to be doing or the circumstances they're meant to be working in haven't been sustainable, and it's caused them to leave. That's really bad news for a games company when that happens, because it means that you aren't retaining your employees. That gives you a bad reputation. It causes a lot of disruption to the projects that are being made. It really damages morale. And obviously it means that the well-being of your workers and the well-being of the individuals who make up the game studio is not what it should be. I've also met people who have left the games industry altogether because they have found that other industries will compensate them far more generously for their skills, and that in other parts of the tech industry, they can find far less stressful work where their skills may be more valued and the work-life balance is far better. I went to GDC a few years ago in 2018. That's a big game developer conference. It's also what it stands for. And both crunch and unionizing in the games industry were two hotly discussed topics during GDC that year. And the two seemed to come hand in hand. And those two discussions were really linked. As someone working in the games industry, it often feels like there isn't very much you can do if you're in a situation where you are expected to be crunching. As an individual, you can always make the choice to leave a company, leave a situation, or even leave the industry, but that is not as easy as it sounds. For one thing, there's the financial ramifications, the practicalities of walking away from a studio. I've heard horror stories as well of people being threatened with not being able to be hired in any other job in the games industry, which is obviously an extreme of the situation, but one that is very frightening to hear about. You know, it can be really hard to get a job in the games industry, and if you have fought to be in the position you're in, it's always a really tough decision, a really big decision to think about walking away from that. I personally really support the idea of unionizing in the games industry. I do think there should be unions for game devs where they can be supported and their rights as workers can be protected. I don't like seeing people dismissing crunch as not a big problem just because the games industry is meant to be fun, because at the end of the day, if something is impacting someone's mental health, then that is a very important issue. Over the years, as people have talked about crunch in the games industry, my perception at least is that things have gotten somewhat better, but we are still far from a situation where that problem is gone. As an industry, I think that our management, the people who own games companies, the people who run games companies really have a responsibility to step up and ensure that their workers feel like they do not have to do anything more than they are being compensated for or anything more than they have agreed to do. As an employee, when you work for a company you love or when you work on a project you love, it is very, very hard to step away. One of the things that I have found is that sometimes, even in a situation where I'm not expected to crunch or do overtime, I feel compelled to do it anyway because I love the project I'm working on. I think sometimes we can romanticize that, and that doesn't really help people. One thing that has definitely helped me is hearing people talk more about work-life balance, and also thinking about things like mindfulness and basically ensuring that I know when to step away from my work and when to take a rest. You know, your mental health and your own well-being should always rank above getting a job in the games industry or your job that you currently have in the games industry or the projects you are working on. On the flip side, there is also a reality of it where there are deadlines that if you work on a project you really love, you want to see those deadlines get met. If you are working overtime because you want to, if you are working overtime by choice, I think it's really important that you are open about that with your team, that you really consider that it is in fact your choice, that you don't feel that you are pressured to do so, and that you find a place where you are comfortable with drawing the line. Just because you did that work one week doesn't mean that anyone can expect you to do it the next week, including yourself. All of this said, if you are looking for a job in the games industry, or if you are considering whether or not you want to stay in the games industry, it is worth remembering that not every company does have a culture of crunch. More and more companies are getting better at considering the work-life balance of their employees and putting that first. I'd really recommend doing your research before you decide whether to join a company, looking at places like Glassdoor to see the reviews of their current employees or their past employees, trying to find any articles on them to see if there has been a history of crunch there, it may have been written about, trusting your instinct in interviews and asking questions if you have any concerns. I hope this has been helpful. It's a really big topic, and I feel like although I can't cover everything here, I hopefully have covered the basics. If you have any further questions, then please do ask them on Twitter, in the comments, wherever you want to, and I will do my utmost to answer them, or if I can't, I will try and find someone who can. Thank you.